The next article I want to jump right into is called Understanding the Fear of Self-Defense and Revolution. And this is a absolutely brilliant article by Brandon Smith. I don't really know Brandon Smith. I know he is a blog writer for a couple of different blogs. But after reading this article, I just think that he has a very spot-on perspective and a brilliant mind. And, I commend him for writing this. And this fits in with the topic I want to talk about here tonight, which is the fear of rebellion. Why so many people are against rebellion against tyranny. So many people think, it was great that the Founding Fathers did it, and the Revolutionary Army and the colonists in the United States rebelled against a totally psychopathic king, but somehow we're in such a different situation today. Less of our rights are being violated and not more? We're under less coercion, we're under less threat of violence, we're under less duress here in America today than we were back in, the late 18th century, in the late 1700s. How is that possible? Because you could have fooled me, folks, I mean, the things that our forefathers here in America went to war over and were willing to dispatch other people over were far less egregious than what's taking place in America today, where 1,000 people a year are being murdered without trial by police in America. And we don't think we have an epidemic of police violence, of police criminality, while our military forces are being used to serve global elitist bankers and being sent to kill people that pose no threat to us. Only a threat that's whipped up in the minds of people by the media, by the complicit yellow journalist, propagandist media in this country, who are bought and paid for liars. So, my point here, to go back to it, is why are so many people in such psychological fear of self-defense and rebellion, particularly when it comes to rebellion against an unethical and unlawful government? So this article is going to explore some of these psychological dynamics, or the arguments against rebellion against tyranny, or simply revolution, as Brandon puts it in this article. I prefer the term rebellion to the term revolution, because rebellion takes on a little bit more of a righteous connotation, and revolution has that idea of you're going around again, Righteous physical rebellion can be the same as righteous revolution. The two terms, I'm not trying to split hairs here. They can be used interchangeably. I simply prefer the term rebellion, particularly rebellion against tyranny. So here's the article. It's entitled Understanding the Fear of Self-Defense and Revolution by Brandon Smith. Our era is a strange one, when considering how social attitudes have developed in such a contrary fashion to the rest of history. I think that our forefathers would look upon our current culture with bewilderment when confronted with the fact that our generation has all but abandoned the option of physical rebellion as a tool for social change. Even amongst the most enslaved of nations and peoples, the idea of revolution has been held in regard as an entirely moral and principled affair involving every individual, no matter their age or economic station. Today, however, that which we call, quote, revolution has been delegated mostly to college-age intellectuals and has been so watered down and whitewashed with politically correct restrictions that the concept is hardly recognizable. I believe the civil rights movements in America and in India in the 20th century have in many ways warped the public view of how opposition to totalitarianism is actually accomplished. I find it interesting that movements led by Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. enjoy so much adoration in the mainstream media and in public schooling, while the American Revolution is often either misrepresented or not discussed at all. Gandhi's movement was, in concrete terms, a failure until Indians had actually began organizing to physically fight the British, causing the Crown to attempt to defuse the movement by suddenly offering up a reformation of Indian governance, one that would continue to benefit them, of course meaning the British. When one examines the facts surrounding COINTELPRO operations by the FBI and CIA during the Civil Rights Movement in America, one realizes that half the efforts and actions were legitimate and the other half entirely manipulated. Over the course of half a century, the philosophy of, quote, anti-violence has come to include a distinct distaste for self-defense. Self-defense is now consistently equated to, quote, violence, and is thus immoral in other people's minds, regardless of environmental circumstances. Even in the liberty movement, there are people who disregard physical defense as either barbaric or futile, and have adopted rather less effective pacifist ideologies of more socialist activism. The problem with certain factions of libertarianism is that they tend to live within their own heads. I'm breaking in here for a moment because this phrase right here resonates deeply with me when it comes to the interaction with a lot of, quote, libertarians. And they have been known as Brandon will get to in a moment, the eggheads, the egghead libertarians. They're only putting forth all these intellectual ideas, but if someone suggests that someone that does not have a right to coerce someone should be dealt with in a physical fashion, then all of a sudden everybody backs up 10 steps. Whoa, we're only talking about ideas here. See, it's never something that's brought into the realm of actual action. This is what is so psychologically feared in the so-called truth and so-called freedom movements. Continuing with the article, the problem with certain factions of libertarianism is that they tend to live within their own heads, reveling in a world of Ayn Randian and Rothbardian political and social theory, while abandoning the other side of concrete resistance. Some in the survival community call these people, quote, egghead libertarians. And boy, is that true. And I think the label fits. I agree, Brandon, wholeheartedly. Continuing. They rejoice only in the intellectual, thus they tend to see themselves only as, quote, intellectual warriors, unquote. For them, the war against tyranny, by extension, must be fought on an intellectual battlefield. Otherwise, as individuals, they have little to offer the resistance. They believe that if they merely present a better and more logical philosophy, they will win over the masses to their side or even change the souls of the rather soulless psychopaths creating the tyranny in the first place. Like magic, they will have won the fight without ever truly fighting. It sounds like a strategy right out of The Art of War, but really it is an intricate excuse designed to avoid risk. An intricate excuse designed to avoid risk. My emphasis. Continuing. They have almost no experience with, and therefore no respect for the concept of self-defense and revolution. And they have no capacity to fathom what such an endeavor would entail. This unknown scenario inspires fear in them, a fear of struggle, a fear of failure, and a fear of death. While taking action from a position of love for one's fellow man is indeed noble, it is sometimes not enough in the face of pure evil. The kind of evil inherent in the ranks of elitism and the globalist ideology. It is important to keep at least one foot on the ground when building a movement of dissent, and realize that while maintaining the moral high ground is paramount, there are limitations to what peaceful resistance can accomplish, depending on the opponent. Let me read that sentence again, because it is profound. It is profound and needs to be deeply contemplated by everyone out there. It is important to keep at least one foot on the ground when building a movement of dissent, and realize that while maintaining the moral high ground is paramount, there are limitations to what peaceful resistance can accomplish depending on the opponent. If you are not prepared to use both peaceful means and physical defense if necessary, your movement will ultimately fail against an enemy without conscience. Once again, I'm going to read that sentence again to let it sink in. If you are not prepared to use both peaceful means and physical defense if necessary, your movement will ultimately fail against an enemy without conscience. Never before in history have humans been so dismissive of the self-defense concept, and I attribute this to clever conditioning and to an ingrained and powerful fear. Here are some of the most commonly heard arguments against physical revolution, and why they are either ill-conceived or outright disingenuous. And here is point number one, that the people who are psychologically in fear of self-defense and rebellion against tyranny always try to bring up. Is revolution morally wrong? So he's asking this question. Revolution is morally wrong? Question mark. Is it? I find the attitude of moral superiority of the non-violence crowd rather disconcerting at times, and in many ways dishonest. It is very common to run into non-violence proponents who are not satisfied with their own personal choice of pacifism alone. In many cases, they will attack or undermine other parts of the movement preparing for self-defense on the basis that even mere preparation is somehow akin to physical aggression. These people are never satisfied until everyone in the movement meets their, quote, high standards, unquote, of activist purity. In the end, I think their position is less about a regard for peace than it is about a regard for their own egos. People in general tend to support the formation of taboos as opposed to honest principles in order to gain what they see as the moral upper hand over others. They invent a condition of arbitrary piety around themselves in an act of self-elevation that does not constitute true morality. Anyone who makes self-defense a taboo is not only living in a fantasy land outside the inherent structures of natural law, he is also likely doing so because he enjoys the sense of social superiority such a position affords. In this way, many of the more irrational nonviolence activists are, in fact, no better than the raving acolytes of the cult of political correctness. Hear, hear. Physical self-defense against tyranny is not only necessary, but entirely honorable. when the violence of an individual is thwarted by defense, when a potential thief robs the wrong house, when a rape is prevented by an armed and prepared woman, or when a potential murderer is shot dead by a citizen who refused to be a victim, our society cheers. But when someone suggests the same measures be taken against a violent and corrupt government, people suddenly claim moral hazard. There is no difference between the act of defending oneself against a common criminal and defending oneself against a criminal government. And I'm going to read that sentence again, ladies and gentlemen. Let that one get hammered into the brain a little bit. There is no difference between the act of defending oneself against a common criminal and defending oneself against a criminal government. I would venture to say that self-defense is a moral imperative, more vital to the survival of peace and freedom than any other. We are talking about the psychological fear of self-defense that is so strong in the modern population due to social engineering, and why people are afraid of even the discussion of the thought of rebelling against tyrannical government physically. You know, the last sentence here says it all. In this last section on this article called Understanding the Fear of Self-Defense and Revolution by Brandon Smith. He said, quote, I would venture to say that self-defense is a moral imperative, more vital to the survival of peace and freedom than any other. I mean, I'm in complete resonance with that sentiment. That is 100% spiritual truth right there. And people need to get that through their head, that is spiritually true. That's the problem, is you have religions like the New Age garbage movement pumping people's heads full of nonsense, that there's no place for self-defense in a civilized society. I mean, please. The religion of stand down. Don't stand up for yourself. Stand down. Take whatever violence is thrown at you. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's real spiritual. You're so enlightened, aren't you? It's an absolutely deplorable garbage ideology that is based in self-loathing, that is based totally in fear. It's based in cowardice, pure cowardice, as is pacifism. It's a deplorable, self-loathsome ideology, pacifism. I am all for peace, ladies and gentlemen, but I want no part of pacifism. They're two entirely different things. They are completely, diametrically opposed to each other. One of them fully embraces and incorporates the sacred feminine principle of non-aggression, while simultaneously bringing in the sacred masculine principle of self-defense. A true philosophy of peace is based in both of those sacred principles. Pacifism, on the other hand, totally throws out in the trash can the sacred masculine principle of self-defense and says somehow it's not valid. Well, I beg to differ. And anybody who wants to think that they're pursuing a spiritual path needs to get it right and understand both of those principles need to be in balance, in harmony, operating in union with each other. So this whole section that I just read, is revolution morally wrong? My question to the listening audience is, did the American revolutionaries during the Revolutionary War period, were they doing something that was moral? Were they somehow conducting immoral behavior by rebelling against the British, who were coming over here across an ocean and oppressing us at the behest of a psychopathic king? Taking people's rights away, raping their women, doing violence unto people in the street? putting soldiers on the street, quartering them in people's homes, completely destroying people financially, taking whatever they wanted. Whatever decree the king said was law was made into law, whether it was moral or not, whether it took people's rights away or not. So, did they somehow do something that was immoral by rebelling against that so-called authority? That totally criminal, psychopathic government? I beg to differ. They did something completely moral that was based in higher consciousness, which is called love. The American Revolution was an act of love. And if you don't think so, you have your philosophy all twisted up. And you don't understand what real enlightenment or real spirituality is at all. Not even a little bit. So let's continue with this article. Brandon Smith, Understanding the Fear of Self-Defense and Revolution. The next section is entitled, Revolution is Futile and the Enemy is Too Strong, ? This is another fallacious argument that's brought up by people who are just cowards and want to say we should never even consider the notion of physical rebellion. So here we go. When anti-defense initiates cannot effectively argue against the moral principles of physical revolution, they invariably change tactics, asserting instead that revolution is a useless endeavor that will only end in tragedy for the participants. I see this argument as a product of brainless nihilism rather than rationalism, and such a defeatist mindset invariably stems from cowardice rather than logic. Absolutely. Wonderful. Wonderfully written. Truer words could not be spoken. Nihilism is a powerful psychological force that destroys all hope and all positive pursuits. It is essentially the act of denying success before an endeavor is ever undertaken. Nihilists ensure their own failure because, for them, every scenario is a no-win scenario. To them, I might seem like a blind optimist, while they see themselves as realists. In truth, pro-self-defense activists are far more realistic. Advocates are far more realistic. There is certainly a fundamental difference in the manner in which we look at the world. When I and those, quote, optimists like me see a problem, we look for a solution, regardless of the scale of the threat. And if we cannot immediately find an obvious solution right away, we keep working until we do. There is no such thing as a no-win scenario for us. There is always a way to overcome an obstacle. The odds of success are not relevant where revolution against oligarchy is concerned. I would also point out the reality that at bottom, it does not matter what the odds are in a revolution for freedom. When all is said and done, you will probably be confronted with two choices in the face of tyranny: fight and possibly die, or surrender, become a slave, and probably still die. Those who argue against self-defense are, in most cases, trying to avoid the inevitability of this choice by creating non-options and non-solutions out of thin air. This is the opposite of realism. Physical revolution requires a methodology of adaptivity and courage. Fear has no place in the mind of a freedom fighter, and nihilism is just as foreign to him. The goal of liberty will be accomplished. Totalitarians will be defeated. The size of the movement is not a factor. We expect that we will be in the minority. There is no other outcome but victory because we will allow no other outcome, period. If we are proven wrong, then we are proven wrong. But it will not be due to a lack of trying. And there it is, folks. I'll read that again. The goal of liberty will be accomplished. Totalitarians will be defeated. The size of the movement is not a factor. We expect that we will be in the minority. There is no other outcome but victory, because we will allow no other outcome, period. If we are proven wrong, then we are proven wrong. But it will not be due to a lack of trying. In our age, arguments of the technological superiority of the enemy are often brandished as clear evidence of the uselessness of physical resistance. I think one could also make the argument that technological superiority in media manipulation and other fields could make nonviolent resistance useless as well. I'm not really sure why nihilists cling to the notion that technology matters at all, except that it perhaps offers an easy and lazy avenue of debate. The enemy has predator drones, therefore revolution is futile. In conjunction with Oath Keepers, I will soon be producing a video that will show the Liberty Movement how to build their own working thermal evasion suits. Perhaps this will quell the incessant proclamations that drones and tanks and Apache helicopters mean anything at all in the face of asymmetric warfare. If the enemy can't see you, they can't kill you. And for every high-tech enemy, there is a low-tech solution. Of course, I doubt this will mean anything to the nihilists, who don't have the will to fight for anything except their belief that fighting back is useless. That's right, Brandon, because these people are cowards. Cowards. And that's all it comes down to. The next section is entitled, Revolutions Are Always Co-opted? I have heard it argued by multiple sources within the liberty movement over the years that revolution is a poor option in defeating tyranny because of the cyclical nature of political and social change. They claim that all we have to do is look back at history to see that even when a revolution is successful in removing oligarchy, the resulting republic is invariably co-opted years or decades down the road. I agree, to a point. The problem is not that the concept of revolution is ineffective. What these skeptics of physical rebellion tend to overlook or deliberately ignore is that no revolution in the history of man has ever gone far enough. No revolution in the history of man has ever gone far enough. Each revolution has targeted the corrupt government of their day, but no revolution has actually removed the elitist cabal behind those regimes. The same cabal of elites that has bankrolled nearly every tyranny over the past several centuries. This is in part due to the fact that knowledge of who these elites are was not widespread. Today, for the first time ever, mankind has full access to information on who the globalists are and what they want. In fact, the elites barely hide who they are or what their intentions are anymore. One can simply look up the roster of organizations like Bilderberg, Tavistock, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank for International Settlements, etc. At least in the liberty movement, we know who the real enemy is. Co-option is always a threat if you do not know who the enemy is. A revolution against the Obama administration alone, for example, would be useless because President Obama is nothing but a puppet, a mascot playing a role. That's exactly right. A good actor, but little less than that. Removing middlemen is a half measure, and anyone who tries to lead you into revolution on the premise that Obama alone is the source of your troubles is probably an elitist leading you toward disaster. If you are not removing the root of the threat will persist. Now, I'm going to chime in here for a moment. The real root of the threat is the ignorance of the population. It's not just the globalist cabal of elitists. It is the mindset of the people who are so ignorant and don't want to be free. They want to be ruled. That's the main problem, and that's where revolutions have stopped short. They've allowed all of these ignorant people to just breed up around them and to stay here. People who want to be ruled to stay where you just successfully accomplished a physical rebellion. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on this broadcast when I'm going to read a little bit of an article by Thomas Paine where he talks about Tories who were loyalists to the British Crown during the time of the American Revolution. And it parallels nicely with these couple of articles on, guns and gun ownership and rebellion, the fear of self-defense and rebellion against tyranny. Continuing with this section of the article called "Revolutions Are Always Co-opted?" ? Co-option also occurs when people become obsessed with the idea of popular top-down leadership rather than bottom-up decentralized resistance. If you are out there looking for the next George Washington on a white horse to save you from tyranny, then you will eventually get him. But he may not be all what he seems. Beware of generals and top brass suddenly in support of revolution. Beware of any notion of a military coup. Beware of any revolution that uses political party divisions as a motivator. Beware of any government with a central bank that wishes to bankroll your revolution. Stay decentralized and refuse any push for top-down leadership. This is the only way to avoid co-option. Brilliant and true. The next section in this article is entitled, "Revolution Solves Nothing Because Mankind is, quote, predisposed to Tyranny." ? The great lie being injected into the movement over the past few years is that removal of the elites will solve nothing because the real problem is the corrupt nature of humanity in general, and that if we remove one set of elites, they will simply be replaced with another set, as if society is fatally predisposed to develop an elitist class. This is the most vapid form of defeatist garbage ever regurgitated by nihilists. Now, I want to jump in on this paragraph here, because I definitely don't fully agree with the sentiment that all we need to do is take out a small percentage of people, the elite cabal, the globalists, the dark occultists, whatever you want to refer to them as, and the problem will be solved. I don't agree with that. I don't know if that's exactly the type of sentiment he's, advocating here. But what I'm saying is, without question, the ignorance of the human population is the root of the problem. And there are many people who will just step right into those roles. I mean, you just talk to people on the street. You need to go no further than outside your own home and talk to some people in your neighborhood, if you live in any kind of a metropolitan area, and ask them, would you trade places with the rulers of the world? And in a heartbeat, you'll get hundreds of people all around you saying, without any doubt, put me in their position right now. This is not, however, inherent to humanity. This is not human nature. So it's not because we are predisposed to thinking like this. It is because we are culturally engineered to think like this. It is a program that is running that has to be disinfected from the human brain, disinfected from the human soul. And that can be done. People can be re-educated by learning the truth, by learning information about consciousness, by learning information about themselves and how their minds work, how their psyches work. This is the occult information that has been held back by the elitists, the dark occultists, to gain a tactical advantage over humanity and rule them, because that population is completely ignorant of how those dynamics of nature work. So I just wanted to say that, that's my take on that. They would be replaced by another set of dark Kabbalists if nothing changes in the minds of the people, if nothing changes in the population, spiritually. I've been reading an article by Brandon Smith entitled Understanding the Fear of Self-Defense and Revolution. We're in the last section called Revolution Solves Nothing Because Mankind is Predisposed to Tyranny, ? And he started this by, raising the argument that people bring up that, humanity is corrupt, by its nature, the corrupt nature of humanity in general. And if we take out one set of elites, then people will just replace them and, we'll have the same problem as ever. And I said that I do think that that is the case, that would happen, but not because this is our nature, but because people are so mind-controlled and conditioned that they want to be like their own enslavers. Again, this is, the concept that they have given us their mindset. A lot of people have psychopathic tendencies dwelling within them, and they would change place with their enslavers in a heartbeat, if only they could be the rulers. And that is not human nature, ladies and gentlemen. That is human conditioning. And only a deep exploration of the self and human consciousness is going to change that mentality, that mindset, that soul sickness. Because that's what it is. That's sickness of the soul. And that is not human nature. We are not born like that. So that's what I would add to that. But continuing with the article, the last couple of paragraphs. First, we have no idea whatsoever what life would be like without the globalist network because we have never lived in a society in which they have been removed, even for a single generation. I think early America after the revolution is the only example I can find of a society free from most elitist controls. And the prosperity that developed in that environment leads me to believe that removal of the entire elitist framework would result in undeniable positive changes for the world. I do agree with that. Why else would the globalists spend the past 2 centuries attempting to dismantle the Constitution and Bill of Rights? Second, if mankind is so predisposed to becoming naturally subservient to an elitist class, why do the elites feel so compelled to manipulate the masses with complex forms of propaganda and fear tactics? Exactly. Why go through all the trouble of engineering economic disparity and war? What is the point if we are all dumb animals just waiting to be ruled? The argument is nonsense. The elites spend billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, in capital and go to such extremes because oligarchy is not a natural state of man. It is so unnatural that the elites are forced to expand constant energy trying to keep us from progressing away from the slave dynamic. Exactly. From the slave mindset. I believe revolution is indeed necessary, a final revolution to remove the influence of the globalist cult once and for all. Not only their puppet governments, puppet political parties, and puppet despots, but the globalists themselves. Will bad men still exist in the world? Of course they will. But the kind of advanced and well-organized internationalist machine that exists today will no longer exist. To save a patient poisoned to the extreme, the patient must be purged until his body can recover on its own. The elites are a poison that must be physically removed from the human system. Now, there are some powerful and brilliantly written words, and I commend this gentleman on the writing of this article. I'll post it with the podcast, folks. My suggestion is to spread it to as many people as will read it, because Americans need to read that and understand what's written there.